Hello there, and welcome to Dreamy Minds. Some nights, the mind feels like a restless zoo. Thoughts pace their cages. What-ifs flutter against the bars. Old memories stretch awake, like nocturnal animals disturbed by a sudden light. But somewhere else, on this same turning planet, under the same moon that hangs above your window, there are places where the night is unhurried, places where rare and gentle creatures move through the darkness with no urgency at all. They are not doom-scrolling the future. They are not replaying old conversations. They are simply being. Imagine for a moment that your mind is a coastline at dusk. The waves of thought are still coming, but softer now, their edges rounded. Offshore, hidden just beneath the surface, slow shapes begin to rise and fall. A translucent octopus drifting like a piece of living glass. A manta ray gliding as if the water itself were a dream. A sleepy manatee hovering in a column of quiet, its heartbeat echoing like a distant drum. As you listen tonight, we'll wander together into the secret lives of rare, peaceful animals. Creatures who have survived not through speed or aggression, but through softness, stillness, and quiet adaptation. Their stories carry a kind of science that doesn't feel like a textbook, but like a lullaby. Truths about bodies at rest, nervous systems at ease, and the deep old intelligence of going slowly. Somewhere deep in your brain, as you picture these animals, small patterns of electricity will begin to change. Muscles will loosen. The long wandering nerve that connects your brain to your heart and lungs will send out a different kind of signal. Less like an alarm, more like a hand resting gently on your shoulder, saying it's safe enough to rest now. Tonight, you are not here to solve anything. You are here to drift, to float through forests and oceans and starlit deserts of the imagination. To let these quiet, unlikely creatures show you what your own mind knows how to do. Soften, slow down, and eventually surrender to sleep. Settle yourself just as you are. If you like, let your eyes soften or close. Feel the weight of your body resting against whatever is holding you up. A bed, a couch, a nest of blankets. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be enough. Above you, in your imagination, a night sky is spreading out. Dark, quiet, scattered with stars. Now imagine that the sky begins to pour downward, like ink spilling gently into water. The stars do not fall. They drift, they sink, they become something else. We are leaving the surface now, the familiar world of restless thinking and bright, overlit days, and we are going to descend together into the deep ocean, into an aquarium of slow stars. On the surface of the sea, things are busy. Waves chatter in white foam. Boats carve sharp lines through the water. Wind draws restless patterns. This is like the waking mind, active, curious, sometimes frantic, sometimes beautiful in its motion. But as we begin to sink beneath the surface, something changes. The noise falls away first. Sound in the ocean travels differently than in air, slower to fade, deeper in tone. As you picture yourself dipping below the waves, you might notice your own world of sound growing softer too. The tiny hums of the room, the distant traffic, even this voice. All of it can feel as if it's traveling through water now, rounded and gentle. Like the brain moving from wakefulness towards sleep, we pass through layers. At first, there is still some light. Sunbeams reach down in long fingers, scattering and sparkling, like thoughts that haven't quite decided whether to stay or go. Fish flash silver and blue. The world is still busy here. But we keep drifting. With every imagined meter we descend, the light thins. Colors drain into deep blues, then into a kind of velvet indigo. Your body knows this pattern in its own way. How, as you move towards sleep, the bright details of the day begin to blur at the edges, shape losing its sharpness, sound losing its urgency. Somewhere around 200 meters below the surface, in the real ocean, the sunlight has almost disappeared. Beyond this, we enter the twilight zone. Not truly night, not truly day, just blue darkness, growing thicker, more mysterious, more forgiving. And deeper still, beyond 1,000 meters, we reach the midnight zone, an endless night that sunlight never touches. Here, the ocean becomes a different kind of sky. Small bodies drift in the water column, many of them quietly glowing. Bioluminescent creatures, tiny jellyfish, floating worms, shy fish, carry their own lanterns in their flesh. They flicker. They shimmer. They hang in the dark like little underwater constellations. It's like floating among slow stars. This deep ocean is a mirror of your sleeping brain. On the surface, your face may be calm, your body still. But beneath that, in the dark water of your skull, whole galaxies of neurons are quietly lighting up, dimming, reshaping themselves. Slow waves of electrical activity roll across the cortex like distant swell, while smaller sparks, memories, dreams, half-formed images glimmer and fade, like plankton flashing in the dark as something drifts past. Somewhere in this gentle midnight water, a small, soft shape appears. Round, with flapping fins that look like ears, it hovers in the darkness like a toy from a dream. The dumbo octopus. It's named, playfully, after a cartoon elephant, because of those ear-like fins that it uses to fly through the deep sea. Unlike the restless, color-changing octopuses that haunt coral reefs, the dumbo octopus lives far below, sometimes 3,000 or 4,000 meters down, in a world of constant, quiet pressure. It is in no hurry. Watch it for a moment in your mind. Its skin is pale, almost pastel in the faint glow of distant bioluminescence. Its body is like a small, soft bell, with 8 arms that are not frantic, but gently gathered, sometimes webbed together like the folds of a cloak. When it wants to move, it doesn't dart. It doesn't squirt away in a panic of ink and jet propulsion. Instead, it flaps those rounded fins slowly, with a motion that looks almost like breathing, or like someone turning slowly in their sleep. Up, down, up, down. Your own breath may begin to copy it without you even trying. Inhale, like the gentle lift of those fins. Exhale, like the easy, unhurried fall. This is something the brain does naturally, a kind of quiet echo. Deep inside your skull, there are networks of cells that respond not only when you move, but also when you watch movement, or even when you imagine it. Neuroscientists sometimes call them mirror systems or simulation circuits. They're one reason you can feel tense watching a character on a screen inch along a high ledge, or feel a wave of relief when someone else relaxes. Your nervous system is always listening for patterns, always learning from what it sees and imagines. So when you picture this dumbo octopus alone in the deep, moving with deliberate, effortless slowness, tiny regions of your motor cortex and emotional brain rehearse that slowness with it. Your heart may ease its pace by a beat or two. Your muscles may soften just a fraction more. Your mind may feel as if it's being gently invited to stop hurrying. In the deep sea, energy is precious. Food can be rare, distances are vast. Animals who live here have learned over millions of years the art of conserving effort, of doing the most with the least. You too have an ancient system inside you that knows how to conserve. When you rest, your body shifts out of the constant readiness of the fight or flight system and into a different mode, guided by long threads of nerve that run from your brain down into your chest and belly. One of those threads is called the vagus nerve. You can imagine it like a gentle wandering river of information, flowing between your mind and your organs. When the world feels dangerous, this river carries messages that tighten the heart, quicken the breath, prepare the muscles. But when your brain begins to recognize safety, predictable patterns, soft sound, warmth, slow movement, that same river can carry a different message, like a hand resting on the shoulder of your heart, saying, "You can loosen now. You have time." Watching, or even just imagining, a creature like the dumbo octopus is one of those patterns. A pattern of unhurried movement. A shape of life that has survived not by racing, but by drifting. As you float there with it in your mind, you may notice that your own thoughts, those darting inkjet thoughts of the day, begin to act a little differently. They might still swim by, but perhaps they don't lunge and twist as sharply. Perhaps they too grow a little rounder, a little slower, a little less interested in escape. Some distance away in this dark water, another shape hovers, almost invisible. At first, you might not see it at all. Just a suggestion of movement, a glint where there should be none. This is the glass octopus. Where the dumbo octopus looks like a storybook creature, solid and soft and endearing, the glass octopus is more like an idea of an animal, barely there. Its body is almost entirely transparent, like clear jelly, like the surface of a bubble. Only a few parts refuse to disappear. Its eyes, dark and watchful, a thin, pale thread of optic nerve, and its small, neatly folded digestive organs. The rest is nearly nothing. In the faint, scattered light of the deep, a body like this is almost impossible to see. Predators pass by, their eyes looking for outlines, contrasts, familiar silhouettes. The glass octopus survives, in part, by becoming nearly pure presence, without edges. There is a kind of wisdom in that. For the mind, all day, your brain is busy drawing outlines around things, this email, that memory, this worry, that plan. It labels, sorts, decides what to pull close and what to push away. It makes solid structures out of passing clouds of experience, because that's how it keeps you alive. But not everything needs to be so solid. Some thoughts are like the glass octopus. They drift through. They don't need a story or a label. They are just sensations moving in the dark water of awareness. It's normal, especially at night, for your mind to try to grab each one, to chase every flicker with a question. What does this mean? Is this important? Should I worry? As you picture the glass octopus, you can practice a different way. Imagine your mind as this nearly invisible body. Thoughts, sounds, memories pass through it like light. Only a few things become clearly outlined, the ones that truly matter, the ones your deeper self is ready to digest. Everything else is allowed to stay soft, to pass through without resistance. Neuroscientists sometimes talk about attention as a kind of spotlight that the brain directs. Where you place it, neurons fire together more strongly. Connections grow. The scene sharpens. Right now, your attention is resting on quiet imagery, on soft movement, on this slow descent into darkness. And in response, large networks of cells in your cortex begin to synchronize differently. Instead of the fast, jagged patterns of problem-solving and busy focus, they start to hum in longer, slower waves, alpha and then theta rhythms, gently rolling through the brain like swells through deep water. Your inner aquarium of slow stars is starting to glow. Far above, the surface world continues, emails sent, lights left on, conversations drifting into sleep. But down here, none of that reaches us. We are in a sanctuary made of distance, darkness, and gentle biology. And somewhere in this dim, spacious room of water, a shadow passes overhead. At first, it is only a darker dark, a slight change in the pattern of bioluminescent flecks. Then it becomes clear, a vast winged shape. gliding through the water with impossible grace. A manta ray. Its body is like a living kite, wide, flat, the tips of its great fins curling slightly like the corners of a smile. It moves not with frantic beats, but with long, sweeping strokes, each one sending it forward meters at a time. Down, and up, down, and up. You can almost feel your own chest following, rising and falling in quiet sympathy. Manta rays are some of the largest rays in the world. Some individuals can span over 7 meters from wingtip to wingtip, yet they glide as if made of silk. They spend their days wandering the open ocean and sometimes visiting coral reefs to circle over cleaning stations where small fish nibble gently at parasites on their skin. They carry in their skulls large folded brains, among the biggest of all fish, supporting social lives, curiosity, perhaps even play. There is something profoundly reassuring about them. Large, gentle, moving at a measured pace. No teeth to fear, no sudden lunges, no restless zigzagging, just a steady, quiet flight through water. Your own brain is exquisitely tuned to read movement like this. Even infants, long before they understand words, calm when they're held and rocked at a slow, predictable rhythm. The inner ear, with its delicate balance organs, sends signals to the brainstem that everything is moving in a safe, repetitive way. No falls, no jolts, no threats. Those same pathways still live in you. Even as an adult, your nervous system listens for the tempo of your environment. Sharp changes, irregular noise, sudden flashes make your inner guards tighten. But slow, rhythmic motion, whether felt in a rocking chair or imagined in the glide of a manta, sends the opposite message. It says, the pattern is smooth. Nothing is stalking. Nothing is chasing. You are being carried. As you picture yourself floating alongside this manta ray, you might feel as though you are being pulled gently in its slipstream, the water around you moving in long, lazy currents. Your body, in reality, is still, but your brain does not fully distinguish between actual motion and vividly imagined motion. Parts of your vestibular system, your motor planning circuits, your emotional centers, they all participate in this quiet simulation. And as they do, your heart and breath may settle into a slower, more regular beat, mirroring the great unhurried arcs of the ray's wings. Somewhere deep in your chest, tiny sensors in your blood vessels notice the change. A slightly slower pulse, a slightly deeper breath. They send their own messages back up to the brain. Things are easing. In sleep science, people sometimes talk about sleep pressure, a gentle accumulating weight in the brain that builds throughout the day as you stay awake. At night, this pressure nudges you toward rest, like gravity. Right now, as you float here, that pressure is still working. Like the water above us, it presses softly, steadily, inviting you down into deeper states of rest. And at the same time, there is a second system listening for safety signals, for reasons to allow the descent, the slow, predictable glide of the manta, the harmless curiosity of the dumbo octopus, the transparency and non-resistance of the glass octopus. These are all quiet, animal ways of saying, there is no chase here, no emergency. You have time. In your own life, calm is not often learned by command. It rarely responds to should. Should be sleeping, should be relaxed by now. Those thoughts are like trying to smooth water with your hands. The more you insist, the more ripples you create. Instead, calm is learned the way the shoreline learns the rhythm of waves, through repeated, gentle contact with patterns of safety and softness. Every time you expose your nervous system to something slow, predictable, and kind, even just in imagination, you are showing it a different possible state. You are whispering, look, this is also an option. Like the brain of a child absorbing a new lullaby, your adult brain, too, can be shaped by what it repeatedly encounters, even in the quiet hours of the night. As we linger together in this aquarium of slow stars, you might notice that certain parts of your attention are starting to dim, like lights being turned off one by one in a house. Maybe it's harder to finish thoughts. Maybe images are starting to blend at the edges, manta wings becoming clouds, dumbo octopus fins turning into curtains of sleep. That's okay. It's normal for the mind to drift in and out of the story at this time of night. You don't have to hold on to every word. Nothing here needs to be remembered or understood or used later. It's enough for these images and quiet bits of science to wash through you, like water moving past coral, leaving behind, perhaps, only a small trace of softness. Above us, the faint glows of other creatures appear and disappear, like distant neurons firing in a resting brain. A jellyfish pulses. A fish opens its mouth to catch falling snow of organic matter. Tiny plankton spin in their own slow dances. Everywhere, life is moving, but not fast. It is a choreography of conservation, of enough. You, too, are enough in this moment. You do not have to do anything more impressive than a dumbo octopus flapping its quiet fins, or a glass octopus existing almost invisibly, or a manta ray tracing long, looping paths through the dark. Your body is already performing its quiet miracles. Cells repairing, memories sorting themselves, hormones adjusting, tiny glial cells in your brain sweeping up the metabolic dust of the day. Whether you are fully asleep yet, or just hovering near the edge, your inner deep ocean is preparing the ground for tomorrow. For now, you might imagine yourself settling softly onto a ledge of rock in this midnight sea, or continuing to float just above the seafloor, weightless in the gentle dark. Around you, the aquarium of slow stars glows and dims, glows and dims. Your breath comes in long, smooth arcs. Your thoughts, if they come at all, drift like distant sea creatures, visible for a moment, then gone. You are held here, in this vast, dark water of mind and ocean, where nothing is rushed and nothing is demanded. And whenever you're ready, you can let yourself drift a little deeper still, into whatever kind of rest your body knows how to find tonight. Somewhere far below, in the midnight water where dumbo octopus and glassy ghosts drift, you feel a change. Not sudden. Nothing here is sudden. It's more like a sigh in reverse. A very slow upward pull. As if the whole ocean has taken notice of your resting body and, gently, is beginning to lift you. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to swim or strive. Just allow the feeling of rising to arrive in your imagination. Very gradually, the dark around you begins to loosen. The water is still deep, still quiet, but there is a hint now. A faint, lighter blue far, far above, like the memory of day. Your mind is following a path that your brain knows well. We sink inward when we grow tired, into memory, into feeling, into the soft, deep machinery of sleep. And just as surely, we can float back up toward gentler, brighter places in our thoughts, without ever leaving rest. As you rise, the pressure of the deep eases. The water grows a little warmer, degree by slow degree. You pass again through the twilight, through the long slanting threads of sunlight that pierce the upper ocean like the first thoughts of morning. And then, at last, you are near the surface. You break through in your imagination with hardly a ripple, a quiet face, eyes half closed, held in a wide blue world. Above, the sky. Below, the sea. Around you, warmth. We are drifting now toward shallower waters, toward coasts and coves and sheltered inlets, the places where the ocean leans tenderly against the land. You might imagine the water turning a soft greenish blue. The bottom coming into view, pale sand, wavering seagrass meadows, gently rocking corals. The waves here are smaller, their voices calmer, like someone whispering from another room. This is where some of the world's gentlest giants like to spend their days. Ahead, in the distance, a rounded shape floats just below the surface, like a drifting boulder. It rises slightly, then sinks, then rises again, in a slow, dependable rhythm. As you drift closer, the boulder becomes a body. Wrinkled skin, grey and thick, marked with pale scars from a lifetime in shallow rivers and coastal lagoons. A blunt, whiskered face, paddle like flippers moving with lazy intention. A manatee. Sometimes people call them sea cows, not because they moo, but because they graze. They spend long hours each day drifting over beds of seagrass or floating plants, lowering their broad, flexible lips to pull up mouthfuls of green. They are heavy, hundreds of kilograms of living warmth, yet in water they seem almost weightless. Their lungs run along their backs, and when they inhale, their buoyancy shifts gently, tilting them upward toward the air. Every few minutes, with no drama at all, they rise. Their nostrils break the surface, open like two small doors, take in a quiet breath, then close again as they sink. Up and down, up and down. You might let your own breathing match this pattern. A slow rise, a tiny pause, a slow fall. Your chest is not as huge as a manatee's, of course, but your body responds to rhythm in just the same old animal way. Deep inside your brainstem, there are clusters of cells that keep time for your breath and your heartbeat. They are always working, even when you forget about them, sending regular pulses down your spinal cord into the muscles of your chest around your heart. When those pulses are fast and jagged, your whole body feels it. Thoughts race, muscles tighten. When they are slow and smooth, everything loosens. This is one of the quiet secrets of the nervous system. The heart and lungs don't just obey the mind. They talk back. As you breathe a little more like this gentle giant, longer inhales, longer exhales, sensors in your chest and neck notice. They send messages up through the vagus nerve, that wandering river of calm, into the brain. And the brain reads those messages the way you might read the posture of someone across a room. Slow, steady breath, soft, heavy muscles, no sharp movements. This looks like safety, it decides. This feels like a creature at ease. You are, right now, both reader and read, a body telling its own story of safety through the language of breath. Near you, the manatee rolls slightly, offering its round, pale belly toward the dappled light above. Its tiny eyes close for a moment. Manatees can sleep floating at the surface, using just enough movement to keep their nostrils in reach of air. Or they can rest near the bottom, rising automatically every so often to breathe, their bodies guided by ancient reflexes that do not require thinking. You have those too. Even in the deepest sleep, your diaphragm keeps moving, your heart keeps beating. You do not have to supervise. You can let go, and the body continues its quiet work. It's normal, though, if some part of you doesn't fully trust that. Especially if your days are full of responsibility, of being the one who remembers, who holds things together. Sometimes that habit of constant management follows you into the dark, making it hard to let go. As you watch this manatee simply exist, no schedule, no list, no visible worry, you might notice a gentle tug inside you. A wistful feeling, a question. What would it be like to be that unhurried, that soft, that unapologetically relaxed? Your brain has spent millions of years learning to read the intentions of others. We are social animals. Our survival has always depended on whether we can tell, quickly and accurately, who is a threat and who is safe. There is a part of your nervous system, sometimes called neuroception, that is constantly scanning, not consciously, but in the background like a smoke detector always sniffing the air. It looks for cues in faces, in voices, in body positions. Tense shoulders, tight jaws, eyes that dart, voices that stab instead of rap. These are signs that something might be wrong, that danger might be near. In response, your inner guard tightens, a surge of stress hormones, a narrowing of attention, a feeling of bracing, as though a wave is coming. But there is another kind of signal, the sight of a body that is both powerful and utterly relaxed. Like this manatee, big enough to leave a wake, yet drifting as if the whole ocean were a hammock. Muscles unknotted, movements minimal, breath unhurried. When your neurons, especially in the ancient almond-shaped amygdala, take in images like this, whether through your eyes or through your imagination, they quietly adjust their calculations. No bared teeth, no sharp angles, no rapid, unpredictable motion. They send their own messages up and down the nervous system. Lower the volume a little. We might be okay here. Maybe we can ease. This is why, for so many people, being around calm animals feels restorative. A sleeping dog, a horse grazing, a cat stretching in a patch of sun. Even pictures, even stories, can touch that circuitry. Right now, as you lie here listening, your brain is rehearsing the feeling of being near a harmless giant. It's a kind of practice in trust, a rehearsal of ease. The manatee turns away, its large tail fin leaving a lazy swirl in the water behind it. Like a fading thought, you drift on. The water grows deeper again, but not in a frightening way, just enough that your feet, if you had them here, could no longer touch the bottom. The color shifts from green to a deeper blue. You are moving away from the grassy shallows and out toward an open, sunlit sea. Here, in the broad blue, something immense is drawing near. At first it appears only as a pale shadow far below. Then, slowly, like a piece of land rising out of the mist, it comes into focus. A mouth, a head, a vast dotted body tapering away into the distance, and a tail that moves side to side with the steady sweep of a great, harmless metronome. The whale shark. Despite its name, it is not a whale at all, but a fish, the largest fish alive today. Some can stretch over 12 meters long, their bodies as thick as a bus, their weight measured in tens of thousands of kilograms. Yet everything about its movement says peace. Its skin is dark, patterned with bright white spots and lines, like a night sky drawn onto muscle. Each whale shark's pattern is unique, as singular as a fingerprint, or a snowflake, or the pattern of electrical activity in a conscious human brain. Its mouth is enormous, wide and square, and surprisingly gentle. Instead of hunting large prey with teeth and tearing, it drifts through clouds of tiny plankton and small fish, its mouth open like a window, filtering life from water. Imagine being close to such a creature, hanging in the blue beside it. Its eye, small in proportion to the rest of its head, glancing at you sidelong with what looks, perhaps only to your projecting, storytelling mind, like mild curiosity. No lunge, no rush, just a slow, constant forward glide. Divers who have shared space with whale sharks often speak of a feeling that's hard to capture in words, a mixture of awe and calm, a feeling impossibly small but also strangely safe. Your brain is wired to notice size. Big things can mean danger, storms, predators, crowds. But when something huge moves with gentleness, that very contrast can be deeply reassuring. The part of you that always asks, am I too small, too fragile, too easily broken. Meet something much bigger and realizes, I can be near this and still be safe. You might, in your imagination, reach out a hand, not to touch, just to feel the water move as the whale shark's vast tail swings past. The current brushes your fingers, more like a slow wind than a shove. Inside your chest, your heart follows. Our cardiovascular system is very responsive to perceived safety. When you feel threatened, physically or emotionally, your sympathetic nervous system floods your body with signals to speed up, to prepare. Blood is shunted to big muscles, away from digestion, away from repair. But in the presence of safety, real or vividly imagined, the opposite circuits can take the lead. Parasympathetic fibers, many of them traveling with that wandering vagus nerve, encourage rest, digestion, long exhalations. Your heart rate variability, the tiny, healthy chaos in the timing between beats, gently increases. Your system becomes more flexible, more able to relax and then respond when needed, like a skilled dancer resting between steps. Just as the whale shark glides effortlessly, adjusting its path with small movements of fin and tail, your inner rhythms become more able to sway instead of lock. Above, the sun breaks into shafts as it meets the surface, turning the water into a moving ceiling of silver light. The whale shark passes beneath this living roof, barely changing its pace. It has no interest in you as prey. To it, you are just another small presence in a vast blue room. There is something liberating in that too, the idea that you can exist without being evaluated or needed or chased. Just a being alongside other beings, all of you held by the same water. In this ocean of imagination, your mind is practicing a kind of social safety. Even without human faces here, your social brain is active, measuring distance, interpreting motion, deciding again and again, safe, safe, safe. Each of those judgments lowers the inner guard a notch. Ahead, near a sunlit patch where the seafloor rises and is buried in grass, another shape appears. This one is slimmer than the manatee, with a fluked tail like a whale. Its snout is downturned, adapted for rooting through seagrass meadows. A dugong. They too are sometimes called sea cows, grazing in underwater pastures that sway like slow-motion fields. Once, long ago, sailors may have caught glimpses of dugongs lifting their heads from the waves, cradling their calves close, and woven myths of mermaids and sea people from those soft, distant shapes. In your brain, myth and reality often share pathways. The same circuits that simulate hypothetical futures or recall long-ago memories help you build these gentle scenes now. Neurons in your visual cortex light up as if you were truly seeing the dugong, truly watching the green blades of seagrass bend and part as it feeds. Picture, if you like, lying back in the water, your body buoyant, as these harmless giants pass slowly beneath you. A manatee, round and scarred and peaceful. A dugong, more streamlined, its movements like the punctuation marks of a calm old sentence. A whale shark, a moving island of spotted night sky. They are so large, you are so small beside them. But notice how that smallness feels. In the bright, sharp hours of the day, feeling small can be frightening. Like being a tiny boat in a vast, stormy sea. Waves high, wind fierce, no shore in sight. Yet here, among these slow-moving bodies, smallness begins to mean something else. You are a dinghy, tucked in the lee of a sleeping island, the swells broken by its quiet bulk. You rise and fall on gentle ripples, while the larger form takes the brunt of the ocean's restless energy. The giants around you are not here to protect you. They don't even know you're there. And yet, simply by existing, by moving as they do, They create a pocket of calm in the water of your imagination. Your nervous system understands this pattern, even if you never put it into words. We co-regulate with others. We borrow nervous systems all the time. A baby learns to calm not by reading a manual, but by being held against a chest that breathes steadily, by hearing a voice that stays warm and even, by feeling arms that do not flinch. Even as an adult, your stress softens in the presence of a friend whose shoulders are down, whose eyes are kind, whose laugh is easy. Right now, in a quieter, stranger way, you are borrowing the nervous systems of imaginary animals. Their steadiness, their lack of urgency, their sheer, massive okayness. In response, your own body mirrors them in miniature. Somewhere far under the surface, your muscles release one more tiny layer of tension. A jaw unclenches. A forehead smooths. If sleep is starting to pull at you, you can let your attention blur. You don't have to stay sharply focused on the details. Just keep the feeling of being small beside something large and harmless, of lying like a boat in calm water, with no oars in your hands, because you are not going anywhere in particular. Off in the distance, you might see once again the familiar silhouette of a manta ray, looping gently above a coral ridge like a bird performing slow circles. We have met this giant before, in the deeper water. Here, in the shallower, sun-streaked blue, it feels almost like an old friend returning, tracing the same unhurried figure eights. You are surrounded now by an archipelago of gentleness, living islands in a warm blue sea. The manatee drifting between naps, the dugong grazing, the whale shark filtering light and plankton, the manta ray flying underwater, each one a different shape, a different face of harmless power. And somewhere inside you, the part that is always scanning, always braced for teeth and storms and bad news, feels these presences and perhaps loosens its grip just a little more. It's normal if some anxious thoughts still flutter at the edges. Normal if you feel, at times, fragile against the scale of everything. You don't need to banish that feeling. You don't need to argue with it or prove it wrong. Just notice how, in this ocean, your smallness is held. You float. The water carries your weight. Around you, slow titans move through their quiet routines, indifferent to your worries, untouched by your to-do lists. For a while, you are allowed to rest in their shadow, allowed to be just another small living thing, in a world where not everything is hunting or hurrying. As you breathe, as you listen, as your thoughts come and go, imagine yourself anchored lightly here, beside these islands of harmless giants. Their calm is not a demand or a lesson. It is simply a background, a soft landscape that your mind can lean against as it drifts toward deeper rest. And if, as you linger here, your awareness begins to blur and darken again, if the edges of these creatures soften into dream, if the blue of the water deepens into the blue of sleep, you can let it. You can let yourself feel, for this one, small portion of your life, like a tiny boat rocked to stillness in the shelter of great sleeping shapes, safe enough for now, small, and somehow entirely held. The sea behind you grows quieter now, like a dream fading at the edge of morning. You can still feel, somewhere in the distance of your imagination, the slow silhouettes of harmless giants drifting through warm water. The manatee dozing in its river, the whale shark gliding through blue, the manta ray turning lazy circles in the light. But tonight, our path curves gently toward land. If you like, you can picture yourself floating on your back one last time, eyes turned to a darkening sky. The air is warm. The waves are small, almost like breathing. Just ahead, the outline of a coastline appears. Not a busy harbor, not a sharp, rocky cliff, just a quiet stretch of shore where the land rises softly from the sea. With no effort at all, you find yourself standing where the water sighs into sand. Your body is dry now, wrapped perhaps in something comfortable and familiar. The sound of waves recedes behind you, blending into the soft hush of night. Before you, a forest waits, not a harsh forest, not the kind with brittle branches or snarling jaws. This one feels like a cathedral built by time. Tall trunks like pillars, canopies of leaves arching high, woven with strands of moonlight. The air is cool and damp and fragrant, with earth, with moss, with the quiet green memory of rain. You step closer. The ground underfoot is soft, padded with fallen leaves and old needles, and the slow work of decades turning trees into soil. Each step is a whisper, not a thud. You are entering the midnight forest. For many people, darkness brings with it a special kind of unease. Our eyes evolved for the day. We like to see the edges of things. At night, shapes blur. Sounds grow larger than their source. The mind, deprived of details, fills in the gaps with stories. Somewhere deep in your brain, two small clusters of cells, one on each side, are paying close attention. They're called the amygdalae, from the Greek word for almond, because of their shape. But they are less like almonds and more like tiny watchtowers, standing guard over your sense of safety. Their job is simple and relentless. Notice what might go wrong. Notice it early. Raise the alarm if necessary. In the glow of laptop screens and city lights, in the middle of crowded days, these inner sentinels can grow tired, twitchy, a little too eager. Especially if you've been through hard things, especially if you've had to learn, more than once. That danger doesn't always announce itself politely. So at night, when the lights go out and the edges of the world blur, your amygdala may turn their spotlights up instead of down. Every creak is a question mark. Every shadow is a maybe. But darkness itself is not the enemy. Some beings greet the fall of night the way flowers greet the sun. They unfurl. They emerge. They begin. Tonight, in this midnight forest, we're going to walk softly beside a few of them, rare, quiet creatures who have made peace with the dark, who have built their whole lives among shadows. They will be our lanterns, though not always the kind that shine with light. Sometimes, a lantern is just a presence that makes the darkness feel less alone. You take a few steps beneath the first trees. Above, the canopy knits itself together, branch into branch, leaf into leaf, until the sky becomes a patchwork of stars and silhouettes. Moonlight drips through in thin streams, painting silver stripes on the path. The forest at night is not silent, but its sounds are different from day. No construction noise, no phones, no engines. Instead, the low murmur of insects, the occasional rustle of small feet in the undergrowth, the quiet, rhythmic breathing of the trees themselves as they trade oxygen and carbon dioxide with the sky. Your ears, freed from the constant clamor of human spaces, begin to attune to these subtler patterns. Your brain's auditory networks, always busy sorting signal from noise, realize that here the signals are soft, repetitive, familiar in some deep ancestral way. Wind in leaves, water somewhere far off. Night voices, none too close. Somewhere ahead, a shape moves. At first you might mistake it for a mossy stone or a clump of ferns shifting in the breeze. But then it waddles, clearly, endearingly, and turns, and you see a face, round owl-like eyes. A beak curved gently downward, a greenish feathers mottled with brown, like lichen on a rock. The kakapo, the world's heaviest parrot and one of its rarest. Unlike most parrots, it cannot fly. Its wings are small, used more for balance and perhaps for a kind of dignified flutter as it hops from log to log. It is nocturnal. Its time begins when the sun leaves. In the dim light, the kakapo doesn't look sleek or predatory. It looks kindly, almost comical if you're inclined to see it that way. It walks with a certain grounded determination, its big feet pressing leaf litter with soft, papery crunches. Somewhere, long before people arrived with bright lights and new predators, these parrots evolved to thrive in the darkness of New Zealand's forests, where being active at night meant less competition, fewer eyes watching. For them, the dark is not a curtain of threat. It is a blanket of safety. You watch this kakapo waddle a few steps, pause, tilt its head as if in thought, then continue on its path. It is doing kakapo things, perhaps foraging, perhaps seeking out a familiar hollow to rest in. Its heavy body and soft feathers seem completely unbothered by the fact that the world is dim. As you stand there, your own nervous system observes. There is no rush in this creature, no twitching glance over its shoulder, no bracing in its shoulders or wings. Your amygdala, scanning automatically, find no cues of alarm in its movements. Instead, other pathways begin to fire, circuits linked to curiosity, to empathy, to the quiet warmth of seeing something harmless simply being itself. This is one way the brain learns, through modeling. Not the kind on runways, but the subtle, animal modeling of nervous systems echoing one another. Even in imagination, when you place yourself near a being that is calm, your brain's social circuits simulate what it's like to be that calm. Motor neurons rehearse the slower pace. The insula, that region tucked deep inside that tracks your inner sensations, takes note of how your breath and heartbeat respond. Little by little, your internal alarm system, still vigilant, lowers its volume. The spotlight dims. You and the kakapo share the same darkness, and yet, what it means to each of you is shifting. The forest path invites you deeper. The air grows cooler here, the scent of damp earth richer. Moss covers stones like a soft green snowfall. Ferns unfurl from the shadows, their fronds like quiet question marks. Far above, a different kind of lantern moves. At first, all you see is a rust-colored streak against the deeper shadow of the branches. Then, a fluffy tail, ringed like smoke rings. Then, two pointed ears and a small face framed in white. A red panda, moving along a branch with the easy balance of someone who has lived their whole life in the trees. Its fur glows faintly in the scattered moonlight, amber, russet, the color of fallen leaves in late autumn. It steps softly, each paw finding its place without sound. Red pandas are shy creatures, more active at dusk and night. They spend much of their time in the canopy, away from ground-level dangers, curled in the crooks of branches or foraging for bamboo. Watching it now, you might imagine what its body feels like from the inside. Muscles tuned not for sprinting, but for steady, deliberate climbing. A tail used as a counterbalance, a blanket, a signal. Eyes adapted to low light, reading depth and distance where a human would see only darkness. Your mind, wired to simulate others, tries on this way of moving. You may notice a subtle urge in your own body to be more careful, more precise, more measured. Not anxious careful, just awake to where you place your weight, how you shift from foot to foot. Even if you're lying down, this awareness can appear in tiny adjustments. The angle of your head on the pillow, the way your shoulders sink, the way your hands rest. The red panda pauses, nose lifted slightly, taking in the scents and sounds of the forest. For a prey animal, this kind of attention can mean survival. But it is not the same as the rigid hypervigilance many humans feel in their most anxious hours. There is a rhythm to its scanning, Look, listen, decide, relax. Your brain, too, is built for rhythms. In each 24-hour cycle, the cells in a region behind your eyes, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, your inner clock, coordinate countless processes, hormone release, temperature shifts, cycles of alertness and fatigue. At night, if you allow it, this clock sends signals toward rest, melatonin rising, body temperature falling, heart rate easing. But if your amygdala's spotlight is too bright, if the stories it's telling are too loud, what if, remember when, those rest messages get drowned out? Here in the forest, beside this careful but not frantic animal, you can practice a different pattern. You, too, can scan. Notice the sounds in your own space. The faint whir of a fan, distant traffic, maybe, the rustle of sheets when you shift, and then, guided by the red panda's example, you can decide. So far, everything is okay. So far, no tiger's roar, no cracking branch of doom. With that quiet decision, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain behind your forehead, the thoughtful storyteller, sends its own signals back to the amygdala. You're doing your job. Thank you. For now, we're safe enough to soften. It's not about turning the guard off, just about letting them lean back in their chairs a little. The red panda slips away along the branch, becoming a ghost of color, then nothing at all. You continue through the trees. Deeper now. The understory thickens. Lianas loop from trunk to trunk. Leaves filter the moon into a dim bluish haze. Here in this layered forest, another presence is watching you as you pass. You don't see it at first. That's by design. Its coat is a patchwork of deep brown and velvety purple, with creamy stripes on its legs that look, at a glance, like those of a zebra. Its body shape whispers giraffe. Its long neck and gentle face, echoing a familiar relative far away on open savannas. But this is no savanna. This is the dense rainforest of Central Africa. And this is the okapi, the forest giraffe. It stands perfectly still among the trunks, blending into the vertical lines of bark and shadow. Your eyes skim past once, twice, before some intuitive part of you registers there is a pattern here that does not quite belong to the trees. When you finally notice it, it feels like the forest himself has decided to step a little forward. The okapi's ears swivel, enormous and attentive, picking up sounds you cannot hear, twigs breaking, insects, distant calls. Its dark eyes are relaxed but aware. Okapis are masters of hiddenness. For a long time, people beyond their forest home had only stories and footprints to go on. They live solitary lives, relying on camouflage and quiet to avoid predators. They do not fight the darkness. They become part of your own anxious mind when exhausted, sometimes tries to fight the dark by turning on more lights, more screens, more thoughts. As if by gathering enough brightness, you could outthink every rustle and shadow. But the okapi suggests another way. It doesn't drown the night in light. It lets its edges soften. It trusts that not every unknown hiding among the leaves is disaster. It holds still. It listens. It belongs. Sometimes, in human lives, the darkness you fear is not outside but inside. Memories you don't want to revisit. Feelings you're not sure you can hold. The amygdala doesn't always distinguish between an actual danger in the room and a remembered danger flickering in the mind. In both cases, it can send the same signals: heart racing, breath shallow, muscles tensed to run. But your inner forest is also full of okapi places, quiet clearings of memory and emotion that, while unfamiliar, are not out to harm you. Pockets of sadness that are simply grief, not doom. Old fears that are echoes, not present threats. You don't have to go looking for them tonight. This is not a journey of analysis. But as you stand with the okapi in the filtered moonlight, you might sense that not every shape in the darkness is a predator. Some are just parts of you, waiting patiently in the shade. content to be there until you are ready. All around, the forest breathes. Trees inhale carbon dioxide and exhale oxygen. Your lungs do the opposite. It is a quiet exchange of gifts, happening molecule by molecule, unnoticed and unstoppable. Inside your skull, another kind of forest rustles, the tangled branches of neurons, billions upon billions, passing signals back and forth in a constant whisper. At night, when the outer world grows dim, these inner forests change their activity. The brain doesn't simply switch off when you sleep. In some stages, especially deep non-REM sleep, vast networks of neurons fire in slow, synchronized waves, like the whole forest bowing in unison to an unseen wind. In other stages, like REM sleep, small pockets burn with activity, visual areas, emotional centers, bits of motor planning circuits, creating the vivid, strange theater of dreams. During these cycles, your brain is doing work that is hard to see but vital, sorting memories, deciding what to keep and what to let blur. Integrating emotional experiences, especially the painful or confusing ones, into the wider story of who you are, allowing glial cells to cleanse the spaces between neurons, sweeping away waste products more efficiently than in wakefulness. But this kind of restoration relies on a certain baseline of safety. An animal, or a human, who never feels safe enough to rest deeply, is forced to live on shallow sleep, ready to wake at any crack of a twig. Over time, that takes a toll on mood, on memory, on the body's ability to heal. That is why tonight we are walking with these lanterns of the midnight forest, the kakapo, the red panda, the okapi, not because they hold any magic solution, but because your brain responds to patterns, to examples, to stories. When night comes in the human world, your amygdala may flare like a siren, misreading every creak as an intruder, every unfamiliar thought as danger. Yet here, in this imagined forest, night looks different. The kakapo waddles without fear through shadows. The red panda naps on a branch, tail curled over its nose. The okapi stands, blending in, untroubled by the dark that hides it. To them, this is not a scary time or an anxious time. It is just the time when their bodies know what to do: explore, eat, rest, listen. As you breathe in this forest air, as you feel the steady presence of these quiet animals around you, some part of your own nervous system is taking notes. It's normal if worry still whispers, normal if your mind still returns, now and then, to unfinished tasks, to old regrets, to imagined tomorrows. You don't need to chase those thoughts away. You don't need to solve them before you can rest. Instead, you might treat them like the small sounds of the forest. A rustle in the ferns, a twig snapping under some distant paw. Notice them, acknowledge, yes, there is that sound. And then, unless it grows very loud, allow your attention to return to the wider hush, the rhythm of your breathing, the softness of where your body meets bed or blanket, the felt sense of trees all around. Not every rustle is a warning. Some are simply the sound of life continuing, softly, all around you, and inside you too. You are not a static thing. You are a moving forest of cells, of electrical storms, of chemical rivers, always changing, always in quiet motion. Tonight, as you lie here, you are allowed to move gently from bright focus into this softer, more diffused awareness. Like your eyes adjusting from a sunlit clearing to starlight. Like a forest shifting from daybirds to night insects. Like a kakapo stepping out of its hollow tree, greeting the darkness as an old friend. If sleep begins to fold over you as you stand here, if the forest fades and the animals blur, and you no longer quite track where this story is going, you can let that happen. The midnight forest will still be here, in some corner of your mind, a place you can return to whenever night feels sharp or loud, a place populated not by threats, but by shy, steady lives who know how to walk through darkness without fear. For now, you can imagine finding a soft patch of moss at the base of an old tree. You settle down, your back against the trunk, feeling its ancient strength behind you. Above, the red panda curls around its branch. Somewhere in the ferns, the kakapo nestles, feathers puffed. Between striped legs and deep shadows, the okapi fades from sight, perfectly at home. Around you, the lanterns of the midnight forest, the gentle presences, the slow breaths, the rhythmic heartbeats, glow without light, without flame, just a warmth in the dark. You are one more quiet creature among them, exhaling into the cool night, your own inner forests preparing to do their secret, healing work. And as you close your inner eyes to this scene, you can let the darkness around you feel, perhaps, a little less like an enemy, and a little more like a soft, deep sky, full of hidden, living stars. Somewhere in the quiet of the midnight forest, you have found a place to lean. Your back rests against the rough, steady trunk of an old tree. Moss is a soft pillow at your shoulders. Overhead, the leaves murmur occasionally, like someone turning over in their sleep. You can still sense the shy movement of the kakapos somewhere in the undergrowth, the faint brush of the red panda in the branches above, the hidden presence of the okapi between striped shadow and trunk. The dark around you no longer feels like an empty space. It feels occupied by gentle lives, moving at their own slow pace. After a while, you notice something subtle changing, not in the forest, but in you. Beneath your thoughts, beneath whatever fragments of your day still float in and out, there's a quieter question beginning to rise. Where is my home? Right now? Where do I get to rest? Every creature needs a place to stop, to soften, to let down the invisible weight it carries. For some, that place is made of wood or stone. For others, it's made of grass or water, of patterns drawn in sand, of distance, of silence. Tonight, we'll walk, gently, along a path through these shelters. We'll visit animals whose whole genius is in creating or becoming a refuge. And as we do, your own nervous system may remember something it often forgets in the noise of daily life. You, too, are allowed to have a shell. You are allowed to build a nest around your tired mind. You are allowed to be safely small inside something that holds you. The forest around you begins to thin, as if the trees are slowly stepping back to reveal another landscape. The night remains. The stars keep their distance, watching. But the air grows drier, the ground firmer underfoot. You feel the texture of leaves give way to dust, to small stones, to the faint crunch of dry earth. We have walked, in imagination, to the edge of another kind of wilderness, open and spacious, under a sky that stretches like a dark, endless dome. Here, in the gentle African night, a low shape moves across the ground. At first, it might look like a strange pine cone rolling along on unseen wheels. Then you see the small head, the tapering tail, the way each part of its body is covered in overlapping scales that catch the moonlight like dull bronze. A pangolin, the only mammal on Earth dressed not in fur or bare skin, but in armor. Its scales are made of keratin, the same substance as your fingernails, your hair. Layer upon layer, they overlap like roof tiles, like a suit of ancient living chainmail. When the pangolin feels safe, it moves with slow dignity. Its long claws, built for digging into ant and termite nests, curve under as it walks. Its tail drags a quiet line in the dust behind it. It sniffs the air, small eyes alert but not frantic. Then, somewhere in the dark, a twig cracks, or a shadow shifts, or maybe it is just a feeling, an echo of danger in the nervous system it carries inside. Instantly, without debate, without self-criticism or hesitation, the pangolin curls, head tucked, tail wrapping around, scales closing over one another until there is no soft part showing. In a matter of seconds, it becomes a ball, perfect, sealed, complete. If you tried to pry those scales apart, you'd find it astonishingly difficult. Even lions, with all their strength, are often defeated by this simple ancient strategy. The pangolin's answer to threat is not to fight, not to run. It is to become a home for itself, a closed, quiet world where the vulnerable parts face inward, protected. For many humans, this impulse to curl in, to retreat, to make yourself small and contained, comes with a layer of shame. You may have been told directly or indirectly to be brave, to face things, to stop hiding. You may have learned to judge the part of you that wants to pull the covers over your head, to cancel plans, to close the door and sit alone in stillness. But somewhere deep in your brain, in the wiring you share with countless other animals, that curling impulse is not cowardice. It is wisdom. It is a nervous system saying, for now, I need walls. For now, I need less. The same inner sentinel that scans for danger, the amygdala, also helps to trigger these protective responses. When it senses too much for too long, it sends signals down into your body to pull in resources, to guard the most precious parts. Your shoulders hunch, your jaw tightens, your arms may cross over your chest without you even deciding. This can feel uncomfortable, especially if you stay there for days or months, the body locked in a half-curled posture of constant bracing. But in small intentional doses, the act of curling in can be deeply regulating. Right now, if it feels okay, you might let yourself imagine doing what the pangolin does, without the hard scales, but with the same permission. Let your knees draw a little closer. Let your spine round a little more into the mattress or cushions, or simply feel the points where your body is in contact with what's holding you, as if those points are the contact points of your own invisible armor. You are making, with your limbs and with gravity, a shape that says, inside this, I am allowed not to perform. Inside this, I do not have to be reachable by every demand. It's normal, after too much noise, too many eyes, too much unpredictability, to need this. The pangolin does not question its right to curl. It trusts the instinct, then it waits, quiet, patient, until the danger has passed. You don't have to stay in that ball forever, but you are allowed to visit it. Allowed to say, as you tuck yourself into yourself, for a while, my safety is in my smallness. The pangolin, sensing at last that the night has settled again, slowly unwinds. Scales loosening, head emerging, blinking. It unrolls itself back into the world, shakes off a little dust, and continues on its way. You watch it vanish into the dark, a small armored traveler under a vast star-filled sky. The ground beneath your feet in this inner landscape begins to ripple. The dust blurs, becoming pale, then paler still, until it looks like sand seen through clear, shallow water. Once again, you feel the embrace of the sea, but not the deep, midnight water of before. This is a sunlit, quiet shallowness, where the bottom is near and the waves move softly overhead. You are hovering above a sandy seafloor now, where small shells rest like scattered thoughts, and ripples of current draw gentle lines in the grains. Here, another builder of shelter is at work. At first, it's just a faint disturbance in the uniform sand, a slightly darker circle, a suggestion of pattern. Then, as your attention sharpens, The design reveals itself, a perfect circle several feet wide. Within it, ridges and valleys of sand rise and fall in a repeating radial symmetry, like petals of a flower or rays of a sun. At the center, a smooth, flattened area, like the calm at the eye of a storm. This is the work of a tiny artist, the white-spotted pufferfish. The fish itself is small, barely the length of your hand. Its body is speckled with pale spots, its fins translucent. Compared to the enormity of its creation, it seems almost insignificant, and yet, over days, carried by some quiet program written into its nervous system, it has carved this underwater mandala with nothing but its fins and its persistence. It swims forward, beating its fins to push sand away, then backward to smooth it. It shapes ridges by fluttering just so, then lets the current accent them. It returns again and again to refine, to adjust, to neaten, all for what, to human eyes, might look like a piece of abstract art. In reality, this circle is a home and an invitation, a place for a female pufferfish to visit, to lay her eggs in the soft center, trusting the structure as a sign of a suitable partner. The functional reason is simple: reproduction, protection for future life. But standing here in your imagination, watching these tiny, precise movements, you might recognize something familiar. The urge to reshape your surroundings before you rest. To straighten a blanket, adjust a pillow, fold or unfold something on the bedside table. To arrange small objects in just the right way before your mind can relax. Humans, like pufferfish, often use pattern and order as a way to soothe the nervous system. When everything feels too big, too chaotic, the act of making a small area neat, a desk, a room, even the arrangement of apps on a screen, can give your overworked brain a momentary sense of agency. This is not just superstition. The frontal regions of your brain, the ones involved in planning and organizing, calm a little when they can see a pattern they helped create. The threat circuits ease when the environment feels predictable, shaped by your own hands. Rituals before sleep work the same way. Turning out lights in a certain order, brushing your teeth, washing your face, maybe reading a page or two, or listening to words like these. To the deeper parts of your mind, these repeated acts are like the ridges and valleys in the pufferfish's circle, signposts that say, we are moving toward rest. The pattern is familiar. It is safe to let go. As you watch the pufferfish trace another arc with its fins, imagine the small routines that cradle the start and end of your day. Not as chores, as circles you carve for yourself in the sand of time. You don't have to do them perfectly. You don't need a mandala-level masterpiece. Even a simple act, a glass of water, a few slow breaths while you pull the covers up, can be enough of a signal. Your nervous system, always listening for rhythms, notes the repetition and begins to associate it with winding down. Somewhere deep in your skull, the seahorse-shaped hippocampus is paying attention too. This structure, curled on each side like a pair of tiny sea creatures, helps turn today's passing experiences into tomorrow's more stable memories. During the day, it is busy taking notes, tagging moments as important, maybe important, probably safe to forget. At night, especially in the early drifting stages of sleep, it begins to replay some of these patterns back to the wider cortex, like a storyteller repeating a tale to make sure it stays. The process is intricate, but the feeling can be simple. Images from the day float up as you're falling asleep, faces, places, fragments of conversations, then blur and dissolve as your brain decides where or whether to store them. In a way, your hippocampus is building a home inside you, a home made of remembered kitchens and classrooms and bus stops, of loved ones' faces and familiar songs. of all the places you've rested your head. Tonight, as you watch the tiny pufferfish carve order into the sand, you might imagine that same quiet craftsperson at work in your mind, sorting, weaving, rearranging. Not in a hectic way, not with judgment, just doing what it knows how to do, tucking the day into the soft straw of memory, deciding what you need to carry and what can be left to fade like disturbed sand in the current. You hover a little higher now, rising gently from the seafloor. The water thins into mist, the sand into pale haze, and when your feet touch ground again, it is something different altogether. Not forest, not savanna, not beach. A field, tall grasses, reeds swaying, their tips whispering to each other in the late evening breeze. The sky above is turning indigo. Stars begin their quiet work. Insects sing a thin, steady chorus in the background. Here, in this swaying world, another home is being built. You have to look closely to see it. High up on one of the reed stems, near where it bends toward the weight of its own leaves, there is a small woven ball, no bigger than 2 cupped hands. Its walls are made of grasses, carefully braided and tucked, forming a hollow sphere with a tiny entrance on the side. A harvest mouse's nest. Somewhere nearby, the builder moves, tiny, light, almost unbearably delicate. The harvest mouse is one of the smallest rodents, its body no longer than your thumb. Its tail is prehensile, able to wrap around stems like an extra hand. You watch as it climbs a stalk, tail spiraling for balance, teeth and paws working together to pull a blade of grass, bend it, tuck it into place. Weaving. Always weaving. The nest it creates is a cradle among the grasses, a place for it to sleep, to raise its young, to be held above the damp ground and, for a while, out of reach of many predators. On windy nights, the nest sways gently with the reeds, turning what could be a danger into a kind of lullaby. You can almost feel, if you imagine yourself tiny enough, what it would be like to curl up inside that sphere. Grasses forming a firm yet flexible wall around you. The wind rocking you, but never dropping you. Humans, too, are nest builders. You build them out of wood and brick, out of cushions and quilts, out of shared routines and inside jokes and the quiet habits of people who love each other. You build them, too, in less visible ways, through the networks of friends or family you can call when things are hard, through the spaces where you can show up as yourself without armor. In your brain, these forms of shelter have their own circuitry. Regions involved in attachment and social safety, parts of the prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate, the insula, light up when you think of someone who feels like home. Oxytocin and other neurochemicals associated with bonding and calm flow more freely when you feel held by a web of connection. Even if you are physically alone right now, even if this day didn't offer much in the way of comfort, you might carry, in your memory, moments of being safe with someone. A conversation, a shared laugh, a hand on your back. Those moments are like strands of grass, woven long ago, still forming part of the nest inside you as you lie wherever you are. Bed, couch, small room, large. You are allowed to treat it, for tonight, as your harvest mouse nest. Not perfect, perhaps, not untouched by the world's drafts, but enough. A small defined space that says here, for a few hours, I do not have to be on display. Here, I can leave some things outside the door. It's normal when you've been buffeted by too many winds, too much information, too many expectations, to crave this, to want to climb into a small enclosed place and let yourself be rocked without having to steer. Instead of judging that impulse to withdraw, you can see it the way we see the harvest mouse's nest, as a masterpiece of tiny architecture, a wise adaptation. Some nights your home woven from silence is physical, a dim room, a closed curtain, a blanket over your head. Other nights it is more internal, a decision to let your attention rest on the feeling of your own breath, to let messages and notifications and problems wait outside the walls of this moment. Right now, your body is already doing some of this weaving for you. Muscles soften into the surface beneath you, making a mold that fits you just a little better with each passing minute. Your temperature shifts slightly, your limbs growing heavier as your nervous system releases its grip. Your breath comes in and out like a tide, steady and unforced. With each exhale, you can imagine another strand of grass being tucked into the nest around your thoughts, another ridge being smoothed in your underwater circle, another scale closing gently over the soft parts of you that have worked so hard today. Somewhere in the background, the hippocampus continues its quiet stitching, knitting the day's loose fragments into something that can be stored or carefully allowed to dissolve. You don't have to understand all the details. You don't have to control the process. Your task, if there is one at all, is simply to allow. To let the pangolin in you curl when it needs to let the pufferfish in you tidy small corners of your world into calming patterns, to let the harvest mouse in you build a nest, physical or imagined, where you can rest, rocked by winds that are no longer threats, just motion. Homes woven from silence are not empty. They are full of breathing, of heartbeat, of the faint, steady work of cells repairing and connections deepening. Tonight, as you lie here, you are already inside such a home. Your body itself, with its ribs like gentle slats, its skin like a soft, flexible wall, its bones like beams holding everything in place. If you listen closely, not with ears but with attention, you might sense the quiet industry inside. Millions of cells turning over, tiny electrical pulses passing from one neuron to the next, glial cells sweeping through like night janitors. This is your internal harvest mouse, your internal pufferfish, your internal pangolin, all working together to keep you safe, to give you a sense of here and mine and enough. You are allowed to trust them for a while, to let your conscious mind recline into the nest they make, scales drawn, patterns laid, grasses woven, until thoughts lose their sharpness and the edges of this day blur into the first soft waves of sleep. Somewhere inside the small nest you've made for yourself tonight, your bed, your blanket, this pocket of darkness and quiet, you can feel a kind of settling. The pangolin in you has curled and loosened. The pufferfish in you has traced its simple patterns for the day. The harvest mouse in you has done its best to weave a shelter of routine and familiar things. Now there is space, not to build more, not to protect more, but simply to be. If you listen closely, behind the soft noise of thoughts and the faint hum of the room, there is another sound, older than alarms and calendars and notifications. The sound of your own body asking, very gently, can we slow down now? So much of the day is about speed, messages flying faster than you can answer them, information pouring in, more than your ancestors would have seen in a lifetime. Fast food, fast news, fast pulses of dopamine from glowing screens that grab and yank at your attention. Your thoughts try to keep up, racing from one thing to the next. Your nervous system, loyal and hard-working, does its best to match the pace, tightening, bracing, quickening. But somewhere deep under all that, there is a different rhythm, older, steadier, tuned not to deadlines but to tides and seasons and slow migrations. The slow swing of walking, the rise and fall of waves, the measured in and out of restful breathing. Tonight, we're going to go visit a few quiet experts in that older tempo. creatures whose entire survival strategy is not to be the fastest or the fiercest, but to be astonishingly, unapologetically slow. As you imagine them, feel free to let your own pace soften, to let your thoughts move like they're underwater, your breath like it's following the easy pull of a gentle current. You are not in a hurry here. Nothing in this story needs to be reached on time. The forest around you fades, like mist dissolving in the first warmth of morning, and is replaced by a different kind of green. Mangroves. You find yourself standing, or perhaps just floating in your mind, at the edge of a quiet tropical lagoon. The water is shallow and still, its surface broken only by the tangled, reaching roots of mangrove trees. Their trunks rise directly from the water, supported by arching wooden legs. Leaves cluster above like small, busy canopies, catching sunlight in thousands of tiny hands. The air is thick and warm, full of the scent of salt and wet wood. Insects hum in the background, but nothing feels rushed. There is a sense here that time has gone soft, like clay under gentle fingers. High above the water, grasping slowly among the branches, hangs a small, shaggy body. The pygmy three-toed sloth. Compared to its cousins on the mainland, it is tiny, only about the size of a house cat. Its fur is long and rough, tinted not just brown, but streaked with green. That green is not a trick of the light. It is real algae, living in the grooves of the sloth's fur, turning it into a hanging island of moss and microlife. The sloth moves so rarely and so very gently that the algae have time to grow, to spread, to make a home in its hair. You watch as it lifts one arm, a slow, deliberate reach toward another branch. The movement is not sloppy, it's precise, but drawn out, like a sentence spoken in a language that favors long vowels. Finger by curved finger, it closes its grip. It shifts its weight, belly pressed to the bark. There is no rush. It has nowhere else to be. Three-toed sloths like this little one live at a pace that would make most humans restless just to imagine. Their muscles are not built for sprinting. Their digestion is slow, their heart rate gentle. Their whole metabolism turned down like a dimmer switch. This isn't laziness, it's adaptation. On this small island in Panama, food is limited. Rushing would burn through energy too quickly. So instead, evolution has written into the sloth's nervous system a commandment that the modern human world often forgets. Go slowly. Use little. Let the world move around you while you hang, soft and patient, among the branches. As you watch the sloth breathe, its chest rising just a little under its fur, then falling, you might notice your own breathing responding. Inhale a gentle reach of air. Exhale a slow release. Your lungs do not need to race here. There is enough oxygen in the room, enough time to draw it in. Inside your chest, your heart listens. It is a musician by nature, beating out rhythms without ever being taught. When your mind is rushing, when emails stack, when conversations replay, when worries spool out into imagined futures, your heart speeds up to match, guided by a branch of your nervous system wired for activity and alertness. But when you present it with imagery like this, of a sloth doing everything in slow motion, of a whole life spent in the arms of a single tree, another branch of your nervous system begins to speak up. The parasympathetic system, the one that whispers rest, travels along long, wandering nerve fibers that reach from your brain down into your chest and abdomen. One of those, the vagus nerve, is especially sensitive to your breathing, to your sense of safety, to the stories your mind is telling. Right now, it is hearing. We are in a quiet place. We are watching something slow and harmless. Nothing is chasing us in this moment. So it sends its own message to the heart. You can ease. You don't have to drum so hard. Beat by beat, your heart rate may drift downward. As it does, your blood vessels relax slightly. Muscles, no longer on high alert, let go, millimeter by millimeter. The sloth reaches the next branch at last, settles back into place, and stops. It may stay there for minutes or hours, exactly where it is, doing almost nothing. To a busy brain, that may sound like a waste of time. But deep in your own physiology, there is a quiet understanding that some of your most important repairs happen only when you, too, are very still. Tissues rebuild. The immune system recalibrates. Hormones rebalance. It's normal, in a culture that praises speed, to feel uneasy when you slow down, to feel guilty for resting, to twitch for your phone at the first hint of boredom. Yet boredom is often just a door into a slower state, one your cells are quietly begging for. As you stand under the mangroves with the pygmy sloth above you, you might gently ask that restless part of your mind, what if nothing urgent has to happen right now? What if my worth is not measured by how much I accomplish before I sleep? You don't have to answer. Just let the question drift, like a leaf falling on still water. The scene around you begins to soften. The mangrove roots melting back into the sea, the branches dissolving into light. Once again, you are in water. But this time, you're not hanging, you're drifting. The ocean here is clear, sunlit from above. You float just below the surface, weightless, your body moving with the easy rise and fall of small swells. Out of the corner of your eye, you see something that, at first, you mistake for a piece of seaweed. A drifting, branching frond, golden and green, with thin, leaf-like extensions waving softly. Then it turns, ever so slightly, and you see a pair of eyes, a tiny mouth, the hint of a body running down the center. A leafy sea dragon. A relative of the seahorse, it has taken camouflage to an art form. Its body is long and slender, its fins almost invisible, its many leaf-like protrusions fluttering with each movement. Rather than fleeing predators with a burst of speed, it survives by looking to almost every passing gaze, like a stray bit of plant matter. It doesn't fight the current, it uses it. When the water moves, the sea dragon moves with it, swaying and drifting, letting itself be carried just enough to seem like any other piece of kelp. Its real fins, small, transparent, beating steadily, provide just enough motion to keep it oriented, to guide its path slightly, but never enough to draw attention. You watch it hover, move, hover again. Your own body, in imagination, starts to mimic the feeling of being carried. You might feel your muscles loosen, your limbs heavy but pleasantly so, like they're being buoyed up by warm water. Your inner ear, home to the delicate organs that track movement and balance, participates in this quiet simulation, even if nothing around you is truly moving. The brain is remarkably willing to believe in imagined motion. When you picture yourself swaying, floating, rocking, some of the same regions activate as when you actually do those things. That's why even thinking of rocking in a hammock can feel calming. Why visualizing yourself gliding slowly underwater can bring a degree of the same peace as actually being there. Deep within your skull, the electrical patterns that represent your wakeful attention, sharp, rapid waves, like a flock of birds darting in many directions at once, begin to change formation. They slow, lengthen, become more like gentle swells. Neuroscientists call these shifts in brainwaves, not because anything is literally waving, but because when you look at the summed electrical activity of many neurons, it rises and falls in patterns over time. When you are busy, focused, keyed up, those patterns are fast and tight. When you relax, let your mind wander in a soft way or drift toward sleep, they become slower, more synchronized, alpha, then theta, then the deep rolling delta waves of slow sleep. Right now, as you float with the sea dragon, you can imagine your brain's patterns as a school of fish changing direction together, from frantic, darting movements to a slow, collective swirl. There is work happening in that swirl, memories being filed, emotional experiences being softened at their edges, the day's many fragments gently rearranging. You do not need to steer that process. You only need to allow enough stillness for it to happen. The leafy sea dragon passes by a stand of real seaweed, disappearing almost completely among its leaves. If not for the small, steady movement of its eyes and the faint, graceful beat of its fins, you would lose track of it entirely. It is doing something the human nervous system often longs to do in a loud, overexposed world. To fade a little into the background, to be present without constantly performing, to rest in being, without always being seen. You are allowed this too. To move through certain hours of your life as if you, yourself, were seaweed in a gentle tide, doing just enough to stay oriented, but not more. Your worth does not diminish when you blend into your surroundings, when you are quiet, when you are unremarkable. Sometimes it is in those very stretches of so-called nothingness that your deepest repairs are quietly underway. The water grows greener, dimmer, as if we are slipping into a softer kind of light. The sea dragon drifts away, becoming one with the kelp forest, and in its place, on a nearby rock, you notice something very small. At first, it looks like a little piece of moss or a cluster of tiny leaves. Then, as you draw closer in imagination, you see a shape, like a cartoon sheep, with a round body and two small dark eyes. But it is green. Its body is made of many tiny leaf-like lobes, each one filled with chlorophyll. The leaf sheep sea slug, a creature so improbable it feels like someone's whimsical sketch come to life. It moves slowly, grazing on algae, nibbling and nibbling until it has stolen something precious from its meals: the chloroplasts, the tiny structures that plants use to turn sunlight into energy. The slug does not digest these chloroplasts. It keeps them, incorporating them into its own tissues. And there, under its translucent skin, they continue to work, quietly performing photosynthesis, using light to help power the slug's own life. A small animal becoming partly a plant, a body that survives in part by simply being in the light. There is something very gentle in that, and very wise. Humans, too, are nourished by more than what they directly do. You eat, you drink, you work, you think, you move. But there are other kinds of nourishment that come not from effort, but from exposure, sitting in a patch of sunlight, doing nothing, listening to a song with your eyes closed, letting it wash over you, lying in bed, not asleep yet, not productive by any usual measure, but allowing your mind to drift in that loose, dream-adjacent way. For your brain, these moments are not wasted. In states of relaxed wakefulness, when you are not focused on a specific task, the so-called default mode network becomes more active. This is a set of interconnected regions that supports daydreaming, self-reflection, the weaving together of different pieces of your experience into a more coherent whole. When you stare at the ceiling and let your thoughts wander kindly, you are, in a way, doing a form of mental photosynthesis, taking in diffuse input, memories, impressions, sensation, and quietly transforming it into insight, creativity, or simply a more integrated sense of yourself. Our culture often labels this as idleness. Your inner critic might mutter lazy when you spend an afternoon doing nothing measurable. But the leaf sheep sea slug has no such critic. It doesn't apologize for standing still in the light. Its very survival depends on those quiet, basking moments. Your emotional survival, your capacity to keep going kindly, may depend on them too. As you picture this tiny green creature resting on its rock, small fronds spread to catch the light, you might imagine yourself doing the same. Not literally turning sunlight into sugar, but letting softness, warmth, and unstructured time repair parts of you that effort alone cannot reach. It's normal to feel resistance to this, to hear a chorus of shoulds in your mind. Should be answering messages, should be cleaning, should be learning more, doing more, being more. Many of those shoulds were taught to you by people who were themselves afraid of slowing down, afraid of what might catch up with them if they did. But tonight, in this in-between space where sleep is approaching, you have permission to question them. What if not all growth happens in motion? What if some of the most important changes in you, healing from old hurts, shifting deeply held beliefs, growing new capacities, require long stretches of apparent stillness? What if rest is not what you do when your real life pauses, but a part of your real life's structure, like quiet pages between chapters? Somewhere deep in your nervous system, these questions are understood without words. As you continue to lie here, listening, imagining, your brain waves may be slowing further, slipping toward the boundary between wake and sleep. Your breathing, if you check in with it, might be smoother now, less jagged. Your muscles, especially in your face and shoulders, may feel heavier, as if they are melting slightly into whatever supports them. You have, for these few minutes, moved at the pace of a pygmy sloth. You have drifted like a leafy sea dragon. You have rested like a tiny leaf sheep, letting invisible processes do their quiet work. Outside this little cocoon of time, the world may still be spinning fast. Messages may still be arriving. Problems may still be waiting with their patient frowns. But you do not have to move at that speed right now. Right now, you are part of a different timeline. The long, slow ripple of heartbeats, the tidal sway of breaths, the ancient rhythm of brain waves rising and falling like the ocean. You are allowed to sink into that rhythm more fully. If sleep comes, let it take you at its own pace. If you hover in that gentle, half-dreaming place for a while, that is okay too. Like sloths, like sea dragons, like tiny slugs turned into living leaves, you are practicing the art of moving slowly. And in that slowness, whether you feel it or not, your body and mind are quietly, bravely, repairing themselves, turning stillness and the soft light of attention into life. Somewhere in the slow green light where the leaf sheep rests and the sea dragon drifts, the water around you begins to cool. Not sharply, not like a shock. More like the feeling of evening falling after a long, warm day, gradual, inevitable, tender. The colors dim from turquoise to deeper blue. The brightness softens, as if the sun is pulling a thin blanket of cloud across its face. You are carried in your imagination by a current that knows its way north. It moves beneath storms and ship routes, past coastlines and sleeping cities, following an ancient path carved by temperature and salt. You don't have to steer. You don't have to know the map. You are just a quiet passenger in the bloodstream of the sea. As you travel, the water grows colder, like a thought becoming clearer. The surface above you grows heavier with ice, pale plates drifting and colliding in slow motion. When at last you rise, and your awareness breaks through into air again, you find yourself at the edge of a different world. The horizon here is not a clean line. It blurs where sea becomes sky, where fog lifts in soft torn curtains from the water. The air is so cold that every exhale becomes visible, a little cloud appearing and disappearing in front of your face. You might imagine standing on the deck of a small, quiet boat, bundled in something warm. Around you, the sea is dark steel, broken by floating ice. The sky is a pale, almost luminous grey. There is a hush in this place, the kind of silence that isn't truly empty, but waiting. Your own ears, used to the constant soundscape of human spaces, might feel almost surprised. No traffic, no electronics, no overlapping voices, just the distant creak of ice, the low hiss of wind, the occasional soft crack as a flow splits and shifts. Your nervous system responds to this quiet too. All day, your brain has been filtering noise, deciding what to attend to, what to ignore. Tiny muscles in your middle ear adjust automatically to dampen loud sounds, to protect delicate structures inside from harm. When the world around you is harsh or clattering, those inner listeners work overtime. The amygdala, that small sentinel deep in the brain, stays on edge, primed to interpret any sudden bang or shout as possible danger. Here, at the edge of ice and sky, there is almost nothing to trigger that alarm. The outer world is still, so the inner one begins, cautiously, to soften. Your breath finds a slower rhythm in your chest. Your shoulders may drop, just a little, as if realizing they don't need to guard your ears for a while. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the chill air touch your face. Then, gently, you slip beneath the surface again. Under the water, everything changes. Sound, in the sea, travels differently than in air. It moves faster, farther, in rounder, fuller waves. Down here, where light is dim and distances are vast, sight is often a limited sense. But sound can cross miles, weave through ice and darkness, carry information from one living body to another like a whispered letter. The quiet you heard above is just a surface mask. Below, the water is alive with hidden songs. You wait. At first, there is only the faint crackle of ice overhead and the soft, continuous rush of your own imagined bubbles. Then, from somewhere in this blue-grey vastness, a thin series of clicks and whistles begins to rise. You don't see their source right away, but as you listen, the sounds form patterns, bursts of rapid clicking, then pauses, then higher, bell-like tones. A small group of shadows materializes out of the distant gloom, smooth, pale bodies, dappled in places with grey, moving with easy, practiced grace. Belugas, sometimes called canaries of the sea for the variety and clarity of their calls. Their skin is almost luminous against the dim water, like pieces of moon that decided to move. They have rounded foreheads, melons, that can change shape as they focus sound, sending and receiving echoes through the dark. They travel in social groups, close to one another, their movements subtly coordinated. As they glide, their voices weave a constant undercurrent of contact, calls that seem to say, "Here I am. Where are you? I'm close. I'm with you." Listening, you may notice that something in you responds. The human brain was born listening. Even before you took your first breath, when you were still floating in the warm ocean of the womb, sound was one of your earliest companions. Muffled through fluid and tissue, you heard the steady drum of a heartbeat, the slow whoosh of blood through vessels, the rise and fall of a voice above you. That voice, often higher and more melodic than everyday speech, wrapped around your tiny forming nervous system, teaching it the contours of safety. This is what calm sounds like. This is the rhythm of someone who is near and attuned. Even before your eyes could focus, your ears were learning how to tell the difference between voices raised in warmth and voices forged in anger. The circuits that perform this subtle analysis, the ones that respond to tone, rhythm, melody, remain active throughout your life. They are deeply tied to the same networks that regulate your heart rate, your breathing, your capacity to feel at ease. Now, as you float among these belugas, listening to their calls, those circuits wake gently. You might imagine their sounds, varying whistles, chirps, and warbles, wrapping around you, through you, in the water. Your auditory cortex, that strip of tissue along the sides of your brain, doesn't actually require real sound waves to activate. Vivid imagination, remembering the cadence of a favorite song, or even reading about sound, can spark small bursts of similar activity. Somewhere in that network, your brain is simulating these whale songs, filling in what your ears cannot truly hear, with something formed from memory and intuition. The signals don't stop there. From the auditory cortex, they spread to the limbic system, the emotional core of your brain, where tone and pattern meet feeling. If you picture the beluga's calls as soft, rising and falling arcs, your limbic system may tag them as non-threatening, even comforting. In response, the vagus nerve sends its quiet messages down into your chest. Slow, now, steady. We are in the presence of something calm. Your own breath can become a kind of call in return. Inhale slowly through your nose, if that's comfortable. Feel your ribs widen, like the barrel of a whale's body filling with air before a dive. Exhale just as slowly, letting it leave in one long, unbroken stream. You might notice that your exhale, if extended by even a second or two, has a particularly soothing effect. The parasympathetic system, that rest and digest branch of your nerves, responds especially to long, gentle out-breaths. Belugas turn, circling you with their soft, unfocused gaze. Their calls mingle. A choir without conductor, but with clear, shared understanding. Each whale knows the voices of the others, recognizes individuals by their unique calls, distinguishes family from stranger, mother from calf. You, too, carry such recognitions inside you. Your brain can pick out a familiar voice in a room full of noise. The sound of someone you love saying your name lights up reward pathways, structures like the nucleus accumbens, flooding you with quiet pleasure. Even reading a message from that person can trigger echoes of their voice in your mind. Those imagined tones can soothe you almost as much as hearing them in the room. In this cold water, surrounded by white bodies and invisible songs, you might let yourself think of one voice in your life that has at some point been kind to you. It could be a parent, a friend, a partner, a teacher. It could even be your own voice from a softer time. You don't have to replay specific words. Just recall the feeling of that tone, the warmth, the care, the lack of urgency. Your nervous system understands tone even when it doesn't understand language. It responds to melody, to pacing, to the small pauses that say, "I'm not in a rush. I'm here with you." This is one of the reasons lullabies exist in every culture we know of. Simple melodies, repeated. Voices pitched softer, slower, rocking rhythms that approximate the beat of a calm heart. Lullabies are like human whale songs, carrying not complex instructions, but a single, steady message. You can rest now. I am near. You are safe enough to sleep. As you picture yourself floating between these belugas, you are in a way nestled inside a vast oceanic lullaby. The sounds around you rise and fall, unpredictable in detail, but deeply predictable in tone. There is no harshness here, no jagged edges, no sudden screams. Your own thoughts, which may earlier have been sharp and insistent, begin to take on the same rounded quality. They become less like critical voices, more like distant echoes across water. Soft, slow, easy to let pass without grabbing hold. From somewhere deeper below, a different sound begins to thread its way into the chorus. Longer, lower, like a cello drawn out under the higher flutes of the belugas. You turn in the water, peering down into the darker blue. Far beneath, a vast shape moves slowly upward, a great length of body, broad fins extended like wings, a tail large enough to send a shudder through the water with a single beat. A humpback whale. At first you feel the sound more than hear it, a vibration in the water around you, a tremor in your chest, as if someone were playing a very deep note on an invisible instrument and letting it ring. Then, as the humpback comes closer, the song takes on structure. A series of phrases, each made of particular notes and patterns, repeated again and again, with small variations. Songs in humpbacks are not random. All the males in a region tend to sing versions of the same song at a given time. Over weeks and months, that song slowly evolves. New phrases added, old ones dropped, motifs reshaped. It is a kind of cultural transmission, passed not through writing, but through the immense, resonant bodies of living animals. They sing across vast distances, their calls traveling for many miles underwater, weaving a loose net of connection between creatures who may never meet face to face. There is something familiar in this too. Your own inner voice, your ongoing stream of thoughts, has patterns, phrases it repeats about who you are, what the world is like, what to expect. Some of these mental songs were learned long ago, from caregivers, from communities, from chance experiences that left strong imprints. I mustn't be too. I always. No one ever. They repeat quietly in the background, day after day, year after year, shaping your expectations of yourself and others. Over time, like humpback songs, they can evolve, new meanings added, harsh notes softened, old beliefs gradually retired. That evolution is not always fast. It rarely happens on command. But in moments of deep rest, during sleep, or in the drifting borderlands before and after, it is easier for new possibilities to slip in. The networks that hold your self-stories are more plastic then, a little less rigid. Dreams can rewrite scenes, offering alternate endings. Memories can be reconsolidated, stored again in slightly altered forms after they're recalled. As you float in the presence of this singing whale, you might imagine that some of your own internal songs are listening. The parts of your brain that narrate your life, the default mode network, humming quietly as you imagine and remember, are hearing in a low, body-level way the alternative. A voice that just sends sound out into the dark without judgment, without self-attack. Humpbacks do not sing to criticize themselves. They sing because it is what they do, because it connects them, because somewhere in the deep machinery of evolution, song turned out to be useful. For attracting mates, for marking presence, perhaps for sheer expression. Your own internal voice is allowed to be more like that, less like a courtroom, more like a song. Not every thought has to be an evaluation. Not every memory has to be a verdict. Some can be simple calls across the water of your mind. I'm here. This is what I feel right now. This is my small sound in a vast ocean. The humpback's phrases rise and fall, rise and fall. Your body, listening, cannot help but be influenced by rhythm. The human nervous system is exquisitely susceptible to entrainment, that quiet process by which one rhythm aligns with another. When you hear a steady beat, whether from a drum, a song, or the repetitive sound of waves, your brain waves begin to adjust their timing. Walk with someone, and within minutes your footsteps often sync up. Rock a baby, and their heart rate and breathing gradually fall into step with the cadence of your arms. Right now, the slow, repeating structure of the whale's song can serve as a kind of invisible metronome. You might let your breathing match its imagined length. Inhale as a phrase begins. Exhale as it ends. Your heart, in turn, will follow that breath, slowing just slightly on the out-breath, returning on the in. This gentle oscillation, heart rate rising and falling with the breath, is called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. Far from being a flaw, it's a sign of a flexible, adaptive nervous system. The more room there is in that rise and fall, the more capacity you have to shift between states. Alertness when needed, rest when possible, lullabies, whale songs, even the rhythm of your own steps when you walk at an unhurried pace. All of these can enhance this flexibility, coaxing your inner systems into a softer coherence. You are, in these moments, like a small instrument, tuning itself softly to the orchestra of the world. The orchestra now is made of ice creaks, beluga whistles, narwhal clicks somewhere distant under the flows, humpback sighs that seem to rise from the seafloor itself. You realize you haven't even formally met the narwhal yet, but you have felt its presence, the faint, high clicks used for echolocation, bouncing off the underside of ice and the bodies of fish, painting an acoustic map of the hidden world. When at last one glides into view, it looks like a dream drawn in long, simple lines. A grey, torpedo-shaped body, speckled and smooth, and from its head, spiraling forward several meters, a single elongated tooth, the tusk that gave rise to stories of unicorns at sea. For a long time, people imagined this tusk as a weapon, a lance for dueling or piercing. But when scientists looked closer, they found something different. The tusk is filled with nerves sensitive to temperature, pressure, and chemical composition. Covered in tiny pores, it allows seawater to enter the outer layers, where these nerves can sample it directly. The narwhal's tusk is less a sword and more an antenna, an instrument for listening to the water itself. It tells the animal about subtle changes in its environment, fresh water mixing with salt, the approach of warmer currents, slight shifts that might herald openings in the ice above. Watching the narwhal swim, tusk pointed ahead like a question mark, you might recognize a cousin to your own inner listening. You, too, sample your surroundings constantly, not with a single horn, but with a distributed network of senses. Your eyes read faces and postures. Your ears sift tone from words. Your skin notices temperature, proximity, the slight tension in a room. Your interoceptive system, networks in the insula and elsewhere, monitors your own interior ocean, heartbeats, breath, gut feelings. Sometimes, when life has been rough, these inner antennas grow too sensitive. They read small shifts as big threats. A dropped fork triggers the same jolt as a slammed door once did. A neutral silence sounds, to your inner ears, like the prelude to anger. It's normal, given what you've been through. But here, in this cold, quiet water, alongside a creature who uses its sensitivity not to panic but to navigate, you might be able to imagine another way. The narwhal does not shut down its tusk because the water is complex. It keeps listening. It trusts that over time, it can learn what each subtle change means. You, too, can slowly relearn what your own sensations and the world's small sounds signify. Not tonight, all at once, but over many nights of noticing. This quiet is just quiet, not punishment. This creak is just a house settling, not a threat. This racing heart is just a body remembering something old, not necessarily something now. As you linger with these beings of ice and song, you may notice that your own inner voice has shifted almost without you trying. It has grown quieter, less sharp-edged, more like a background hum than a scolding. If you listen for it intentionally, you might catch it saying simpler things now. I'm tired. I'm here. I survived today. Perhaps, in the distance of your mind, it sounds like a whale call, a long, low note that doesn't demand an answer, only expresses presence. You can answer it, or not. You can let it echo and fade, knowing that another gentle call will come when needed, that somewhere inside you there is, and always will be, a voice capable of speaking to you kindly. The sea around you slowly darkens, not with threat, but with the onset of deep night. Above, the horizon disappears into a seamless blend of ice and sky. Below, the whales move off along their own secret routes, their songs growing fainter, more like memories than current sound. You float in the middle, held by water colder than anything you'll feel in your room, and yet warmed by the quiet work of your own body. A small, persistent furnace under bone and skin. Your breath moves in and out. Your heart keeps time. Your brain, touched by imagined rhythms and ancient songs, is gently reshaping its own patterns. You are not doing this alone. You are part of a planet where mothers hum to children, where whales sing across oceans, where narwhals feel the salt change along an ice edge, where belugas call to one another under the frozen ceiling of the sea. All of that sound, human and more than human, forms a vast, patient choir that you, tonight, are allowed to rest within. As you lie wherever you are, covered by blankets instead of sky, you can imagine just one last, distant call reaching you from the dark water. A whale's voice, impossibly large and gentle, carrying a simple message through miles of cold silence. I am here. You are not alone. You don't have to answer. You can let that message settle in your chest like a small, warm stone. And if sleep comes now, it can come like a tide, slow, steady, wrapping you in its own quiet song at the edge of your personal ice and sky. And now, the journey begins to fade, like the last colors of twilight sinking into blue. We have wandered together through deep oceans and heavy forests, through mangroves and coral gardens and cold northern seas. We have watched a dumbo octopus fly through the dark like a small flapping moon, floated beside sleeping manatees and harmless giants, walked with hidden parrots and shadowed forest keepers, curled with pangolins into perfect quiet circles, drifted at the unhurried pace of sloths and sea dragons, listened for narwhals and belugas singing at the ice edge of the world. All along, these were not only stories about them, they were stories about you. Somewhere inside your mind, rare and gentle patterns have been waking up, old circuits that know how to rest, how to trust, how to feel safe for a while. The same body that runs and worries and braces against each day also carries within it the blueprint for stillness. A nervous system that can, when given the smallest permission, shift from guarding to healing, from scanning to dreaming. It's normal if parts of you still feel alert, if some thoughts are reluctant to settle. Even the calmest oceans have a little surface wind. You don't need to force silence. You don't need to chase sleep. You are allowed simply to lie here, like a whale shark drifting, like a kakapos resting in the roots of an ancient tree, like a tiny leaf sheep slug waiting in the quiet, trusting that the light will return. As you linger in the softness after these stories, you might choose one creature to keep you company, a guardian of tonight's rest. Perhaps a manta ray to lend you its gliding ease, or a pangolin to lend you its perfect boundaries, or a beluga to hum silently in the background of your thoughts. Let their presence, imagined yet real to your brain, be a gentle reminder you are part of this living, breathing planet of slow stars and soft bodies. You belong to a world where rest is not a luxury, but a law written into the cells of every creature that has ever closed its eyes. Whenever you're ready, you can follow them inward, into that deep, quiet ocean of sleep, where rare and beautiful things are always waiting in there.